So chainsaws are used generally for cutting trees down and cutting branches off of trees. But they could also be made to do a little bit more work, and that would be to mill a log into a beam. And the first house that my wife and I built, I did with this thing here. This is a broad axe. It's an axe that's just sharpened on one side. So it's sort of like a chisel. And you simply work your way down one side of a log, roll it, work your way down the other side. It takes quite a long time. But I was 19, 20 years old, so it was wonderful. Today I can hardly pick this thing up. So I would never dream of doing it that way again. The second home that we built, we did with a chainsaw. It was actually that chainsaw I had up here earlier. And that's done with a chainsaw mill clamp. There are a bunch of them out there on the market, but the one that works best is the simplest one. And this too is made by Granberg. It simply slides on like so. And we clamp it on the blade, being careful not to clamp the chain. And we now have a chainsaw mill. This sits on a board that has a rail on it. You purchase this thing, the rail pieces come about this long, and you get enough pieces in the kit that they sell that goes 16 feet. So this is a 16-foot pressure-treated board. I've had this board for 40 years, the same board, just been kicking around outdoors. And the chainsaw mill simply slides very nicely up and down the board. So you have your log. Lying there. We're going to take that board and screw it to the tree about every 6 feet with GRK screws, something like this. You might want to have some that are 3 inches long and some that are 6 inches long, because the tree, of course, goes up and down with knots and so on. And then we're going to stick here some sacrificial wedges. And over here. And we're going to pound those wedges underneath where the screw is, and we might have 2 or 3 wedges. And up on top here, we're going to have a level, which we put right on the board. So we're going to be tapping on this side, moving this board back and forth until it shows level. And then we do that every 6 feet. So now we have a board that is horizontal in this direction, but it's going up and down as it follows the tree. We then place the saw on here, and the bar is going to come down and cut this off. You simply slide it along from one end to the other, and then this scab here falls off. Next, we roll it with this flat part up, and now we don't need the wedges because we have a flat side, and we just take the board and stick it right to that flat side. So it's a very simple process, and you know, an 8x8 that's 14, 15 feet long, it can cost a couple $100. So if you have the trees there and you have this $100 chainsaw mill to add to your chainsaw, you can make quite a bit of money pretty quickly. When you're using a chainsaw to cut through a tree, the cells are going up and down and you're cutting across the fat cells. When you're running along the log, you're hitting the ends of the cells. So you're going through a lot more wood. So a regular chain does not do that as well as it could. So there is something called a ripping chain. And it's basically starts off with the same chain, but then the teeth are altered. So some of the teeth will be cut at 10 degrees and some at 70 degrees instead of the normal 35. And about a third of the teeth are basically sawed off so that they're used to clear the wood out of the milling process. So a ripping chain increases the cutting ability by at least 30 or 40% over the regular chain, and is certainly worth doing. Now the next step, of course, if you're doing a lot of this, would be to move up to a bandsaw mill. And perhaps in a future discussion we'll demonstrate that to you. They're fairly common, and there are lots of them out there available secondhand. So there's nothing like buying a new chainsaw that becomes yours and that wears out the way you like it to wear out. But of course they can be quite expensive. There's nothing wrong with a used chainsaw. What you should do is ask the owner if you might take the muffler off. And if he lets you do that, you can look in through the muffler hole and you pull the cord until the rings on the piston show up on the muffler side. And you can then see whether there are score marks on the piston. If there's the slightest bit of score mark in there, the saw's no good. You can tell him, well, this saw's really no good. Look at all those score marks. He said, I'll take it off your hands if you like. And then you can take it home and spend the $100 or $140 that it might take to get the cylinder and piston and then rebuild it. But you certainly should not pay to buy a saw that's basically a dead saw. So if you go to buy a saw, certainly you have to run it. So ask the owner if you can start it and take it to a log. I don't think it's all that necessary to actually cut wood, but you don't want to see whether it still has its power under load. So running it into a piece of wood would certainly be worth doing. As far as parts, there are so many saws out there. Over the years, there must be several thousand different models of saws. So parts have become very difficult to get for 1,000 different saws. All these dealers that were put out of business by the Harvard MBA, all those parts disappeared, and it wasn't worth anybody continuing to have them. But if you do Google, there are a couple of companies, parts.com kind of thing, Green Power, just Google parts for chainsaws, and things will come up. And so you might possibly find some things. So when we took the carburetor apart, we had all of these rubber pieces, and that's called a carburetor kit. And that cost maybe $20. For $20, you completely rebuild your whole carburetor. I probably have 30 chainsaws altogether, and for 20 of those, I cannot get the carburetor kits. They simply don't exist anymore. So that would mean, of course, if I had enough money, I would go to some kind of shop somewhere that can cut these out. They're just rubber. So it would still be possible to rebuild those. But yes, I encourage people to get used to their own chainsaw. It can be very useful. I heat my house completely with wood, and I only use dead trees that have already fallen over. So I'm not cutting down live trees. One tree will produce enough oxygen for 10 people to breathe a year. So it's absolutely terrible to be cutting down live trees. And the world today is cutting our forests down at an unbelievable rate. And if you combine that with the enormous fires that are also caused by human mismanagement, the devastation of oxygen-producing trees is unbelievable. And of course, when the trees burn, all of that carbon is in the air. So we are dramatically hurting ourselves right now. We're in a very bad mix of practices. But I understand that industry is beginning to look at ways to take carbon right out of the air and store it deep in the soil where it was to begin with oil. So mankind is pretty wily and pretty able to deal with things as they come. So I'm not pessimistic about it, but it certainly does require us to be alert at what's happening. So I thank you for being with us. I hope you got something out of this. And shelterinstitute.com, please look us up, and I'll see you next time.
Hey there, thank you for watching. Here at Shelter Institute in Woolwich, Maine, we teach a wide variety of house building and timber framing and carving classes. We'd love to see you here, but if you can't make it to Maine to take one of our classes, our online class is available at shelterinstitute.com.